You ever notice how the quietest moments carry the heaviest words? I do now. I replay that Tuesday evening more times than I can count. The smell of rosemary chicken in the oven, the 6 o'clock news murmuring from the living room, the way the late October light came through the kitchen window and turned everything amber and soft. 41 years of marriage had given us a rhythm, my husband Raymond and me. Dinner at 6, news at 6:30, decaf at 8, and somewhere in between, if we were lucky, we'd sit at the kitchen table and just talk, not about anything important. About the neighbor's new dog, about whether the hardware store on Elm was going to close, about nothing at all. That Tuesday, Raymond didn't eat much. He pushed the chicken around his plate, and I always noticed, but I didn't say anything right away. He'd been tired lately. The doctors said his heart was managing, that the medication was doing what it was supposed to do. I told myself tired was just tired. Then he set down his fork, looked at me the way he used to look at me when we were young, and he had something serious to say, and he reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "Margaret," he said, "just my name. Quiet." Like he was testing the word. I looked up from my plate. "There's a green envelope," he said, "in the wooden box. The one in the bottom drawer of my desk under the old insurance papers. You know the one." I did know the one. A dark walnut box his father had made him, small enough to hold in both hands, with a brass latch that had turned green over the years. Raymond kept old things in it, a photograph of his parents on their wedding day, his discharge papers from the army, a letter his mother wrote him the summer he turned 17. "I know it," I said. He nodded. "If anything ever happens to me, don't open it in front of anyone. Not anyone. You take it somewhere private first. You understand?" I wanted to say nothing was going to happen to him. I wanted to change the subject, to tell him he was being dramatic, to get up and bring the decaf early just to break the weight of what he was saying. Instead, I squeezed his hand. "I understand," I said. He smiled. Not a sad smile. A relieved one, like he'd been carrying that sentence for a while and was glad to finally set it down. We did the dishes together after. He dried while I washed, same as always. He hummed something I didn't recognize. I didn't ask him what it was. I wish I had. 4 days later, Raymond was gone. He went in his sleep, which the doctors told me afterward was peaceful, which I suppose is what they're trained to say. His heart simply stopped. No warning, no struggle, just Raymond there one moment and then not there at all. I woke up at 5 in the morning to the stillness on his side of the bed, and I knew before I even reached for him. I will not try to describe what the next 24 hours felt like. There are no words that are equal to that kind of silence. Our daughter Caroline flew in from Portland. Our son-in-law drove her straight from the airport. Friends from church started arriving with casseroles and quiet voices, and I sat in Raymond's chair in the living room because it smelled like him still, and I tried to hold myself together for everyone who needed me to. 72 hours after I found Raymond, my sister-in-law showed up at my front door. Diane had not been to our house in 6 years. 6 years. She and Raymond had a falling out over their mother's estate back in 2018. I won't drag all of that into the light again, but the short version is that Raymond felt she had been dishonest about what their mother wanted, and Diane felt Raymond had been controlling, and after a year of lawyers and sharp words and one screaming phone call I will never forget, they had stopped speaking. Raymond sent her a Christmas card every year. She never responded. And yet there she was on my porch at 10 in the morning, 72 hours after I lost my husband. She was wearing a gray blazer I didn't recognize. She looked composed in a way that didn't match the occasion. And standing just behind her, half a step back, was a man in a dark suit holding a leather briefcase. I opened the door slowly. "Diane," I said. "Margaret." She didn't hug me. She didn't say she was sorry. She looked past my shoulder into the house for just a moment before her eyes came back to mine. "This is Gerald Holt. He's an attorney. We need to talk to you about Raymond's estate." I stood there in the doorway of the home Raymond and I had lived in for 33 years, and I felt something cold move through me that had nothing to do with the November air. "My husband has been gone for 3 days, I said. "I know," she said. "And I'm sorry for your loss. But there are legal matters that can't wait, Margaret. Raymond had a will, Gerald has it." She said it so cleanly, so efficiently, like she was reciting something she had rehearsed on the drive over. I stepped back and let them in because I didn't know what else to do. Caroline was in the kitchen. She came into the hallway when she heard the voices, and I watched her face go through confusion, then recognition she'd met Diane twice, years ago, and then a careful, controlled stillness when she saw the attorney. We sat in the living room. Gerald Holt set his briefcase on the coffee table and opened it with the deliberate calm of a man who had done this many times before and had decided long ago not to feel anything about it. He produced a document and placed it on the table facing me. "This is Raymond's last will and testament," he said, "executed 8 months ago." I looked at the papers. Raymond's name was at the top. The signature at the bottom looked like his looping, slightly tilted to the right, the way he always wrote. I stared at it for a long moment. "Raymond and I worked with a different attorney," I said. "David Park, over on Whitmore Street. We updated our will together 3 years ago." Gerald Holt nodded, as though he had anticipated exactly this. "Raymond came to me separately," he said. "He wanted to make certain changes that he felt were personal." Diane was sitting with her hands folded in her lap, watching me. "What changes?" I said. It wasn't a question. I already felt the answer coming toward me like something inevitable. "The house," Gerald Holt said, "along with the majority of Raymond's financial assets, are to be transferred to his sister, Diane Carlisle, as the primary beneficiary. There are minor provisions for charitable donations and a small trust designated for your personal living expenses." He paused. "I understand this is difficult timing." Caroline made a sound from the chair beside me. I put my hand on her arm without looking at her. I was remarkably calm. I don't know where that calm came from, maybe from 41 years of learning that the moments that matter most require steadiness, or maybe I was simply numb. Or maybe, somewhere in the back of my mind, I was thinking about a green envelope in a wooden box in the bottom drawer of Raymond's desk. "I'd like you both to leave now," I said. Diane's expression shifted. Something flickered behind her eyes, impatience, maybe, or the faintest edge of alarm. "Margaret, I understand this is a shock. You came to my house," I said, 3 days after my husband died, without a phone call, without any warning, with an attorney, while my daughter is here, while we are still arranging his funeral. I stood up. "Whatever legal process needs to happen will happen through the proper channels, with my own attorney present. But right now, I am asking you to leave." Gerald Holt closed his briefcase. He left a business card on the coffee table. Diane looked at me one more moment, that same composed, rehearsed look, and then she walked out ahead of him without another word. I watched them get into a black car and drive away. Caroline was standing beside me. "Mom," she said carefully, "what was that?" "I need to make a phone call," I said. "And then I need to get something from your father's desk." I called David Park that same afternoon. He was Raymond's attorney and had been a friend of ours since the early 90s. He listened to everything I told him without interrupting, and when I finished, there was a brief silence before he said, quietly, "Margaret, Raymond called me about 6 weeks ago. He told me something like this might happen. He asked me to keep a copy of your joint will in a separate secure file and to be available to you quickly if you ever needed me." I sat down on the edge of the bed. "He knew," I said. "He suspected," David said. "He didn't tell me everything, but he said, and I'm reading from my notes here, he said, if Diane ever comes to Margaret with a piece of paper, Margaret is going to need you fast." I pressed my hand to my mouth. After I hung up, I sat alone in Raymond's study for a long time. The room still smelled like him, old books and cedar, and the faint trace of the coffee he always drank at his desk on Sunday mornings. I opened the bottom drawer slowly. The insurance papers were right on top, just like he said. I lifted them out, and underneath, there it was, the walnut box with the brass latch gone green. I carried it to the kitchen table. I sat down. I unlatched it carefully. Inside, on top of everything else, was the green envelope. My name was written on the front in Raymond's handwriting, not his casual everyday scrawl, but his careful handwriting, the kind he reserved for birthday cards and important letters. The kind that meant he had thought about every word. I opened it slowly. There were 4 pages inside, handwritten, dated 3 months ago, and as I read, the kitchen blurred around me, and I had to stop twice to breathe, and I understood fully, finally, completely what my husband had done. Raymond had suspected Diane for almost a year. It had started, he wrote, when he ran into an old colleague of hers at a hardware convention in Columbus. This colleague, not knowing the history between Raymond and Diane, mentioned casually that Diane had been asking questions about Raymond's business, about the value of our property, about whether Raymond had ever discussed changing his estate plans. Raymond had come home from that trip quiet and watchful in a way I'd noticed, but hadn't understood. He'd done his own research after that. He'd hired a private investigator I didn't know, and what the investigator found was this: Diane had approached Gerald Holt 14 months ago. She had provided Holt with materials she claimed were from Raymond. Holt, who had a reputation for not asking too many questions, had agreed to draw up documents. But Raymond had also, very quietly, done something else. 3 months before he died, he had visited a notary and a witness, and had written a full account of what he knew and what he suspected, signed and witnessed and sealed. He had photographed the documents Diane had sent him over the years. He had spoken to David Park. He had made sure the joint will was airtight, and he had written 4 pages to me explaining all of it, every name and date and detail, so that if anything ever happened to him before he could address it himself, I would not be alone in that room with a stranger's briefcase and no footing to stand on. He had protected me before he left. At the bottom of the 4th page, in the last paragraph, he had written, "Margaret, if you're reading this, I'm sorry I couldn't tell you in person. I didn't want to frighten you, and I kept hoping I was wrong. But I want you to know that I spent a long time thinking about what mattered, and it was never the house or the money. It was you. It was always you. Call David. He'll know what to do. And don't let anyone make you feel like you are standing on uncertain ground, because I made sure you weren't." I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that. The evening came in slowly through the windows. Caroline found me there when she came downstairs, and she sat across from me, and I handed her the letter without a word, and she read it with tears running down her face. "Dad," she said, finally, softly. "Just that." David Park moved quickly. He was in contact with Gerald Holt's office by the end of the week, and he filed a challenge to the fraudulent will with the documentation Raymond had left: the notarized account, the photographs, the investigator's report. He also contacted the State Bar Association regarding Gerald Holt's conduct. What followed took time. These things always do. There were depositions and hearings and long waiting rooms and more paperwork than I had ever seen in my life. I am not going to pretend it was simple or clean or easy. But the truth, once it was laid out, was not complicated. Handwriting analysis confirmed that while Raymond's signature on Diane's version of the will bore surface similarities to his authentic signature, there were measurable inconsistencies. The notary who had supposedly witnessed the document had no record of Raymond in his office on the date listed. Gerald Holt, when faced with the evidence, produced documentation he claimed validated the meeting documentation that investigators found had been created after the fact, and the private investigator's report, combined with phone records that David's team was able to subpoena, showed a clear pattern of contact between Diane and Holt going back 14 months, including a message Diane sent 3 weeks before Raymond died, in which she discussed the timeline for the document being ready. She had been planning this for over a year. Diane was charged with will fraud and conspiracy to commit fraud. Gerald Holt was charged alongside her and subsequently disbarred. The case went to trial 7 months after Raymond's death. I sat in that courtroom every day. Diane looked at me once, toward the end of the trial, from across the room. I don't know what she expected to see. Maybe she expected to see grief or anger or some kind of collapse. I looked back at her steadily. Raymond had made sure I had somewhere to stand. I stood there. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Diane was convicted on both counts. She was sentenced to 11 years. I drove home from the courthouse alone. I had asked Caroline to let me have that drive, and I took the long way, past the hardware store on Elm that had managed to stay open after all, past the park where Raymond and I used to walk on Sunday mornings, past the diner where we had coffee the first morning after we moved into our house 33 years ago. I thought about the rosemary chicken. I thought about the way the light had been amber and soft through the kitchen window. I thought about how Raymond had set down his fork and said my name like he was testing the weight of it. He had known. Not known he was going to die in 4 days. I don't believe he knew that precisely. But he had known his body was not reliable, and he had known his sister was not safe, and in the quiet, private hours I didn't know about, he had done everything a man could do to make sure that when he was no longer there to stand beside me, I would still have somewhere solid to stand. People ask me sometimes how I got through it. A friend from church asked me that just a few months ago. Over coffee, she said, "Margaret, how did you stay so calm through all of it?" I told her the truth. I stayed calm because I was never actually alone, not from the moment I opened that green envelope. My husband was in every page of it, steady and careful and thinking of me the way he always had. Some people leave money or property or a name on a building. Raymond left me a roadmap. He left me a letter in a wooden box, and an attorney on standby, and a private investigator's report in a manila folder, and 4 pages of handwriting that told me, clearly and without any doubt, that I had been loved. And I want to say something here to anyone listening who might be in the middle of something like this, because I know some of you are. I've heard from you. You've sent messages and you've shared your own stories, and I know I am not the only one who has sat in a living room while someone placed a piece of paper on a coffee table and waited to see if you would simply fold. You don't have to fold. Get yourself a good attorney. Keep your own records. Know where your documents are. And if the people in your life who should be showing up with comfort are instead showing up with briefcases, trust that feeling in your chest that tells you something is wrong. It is not paranoia. It is wisdom. It is every year of your life telling you to pay attention. Raymond paid attention. He paid attention for both of us, in the end. The walnut box sits on my desk now. I kept the green envelope and the letter inside it. Sometimes in the evenings I sit in Raymond's chair and I hold the box in my lap and I think about 41 years of dinners and dishes and decaf at 8. And I think about a man who loved me quietly and practically and completely, right up to the very end. I learned something the hard way, and then I learned it again from a letter in a green envelope. The people who truly love you don't only protect you when they're present. If they're the kind of person Raymond was, they find a way to protect you even after they're gone.